logo on the board. Welcome to Evolution Hour. Remember, there is a website. Lots of wonderful little material that are freely shareable to absolutely everybody on the planet at tortuganwordpress.com. So, we are here back again for another week of Evolution Hour after our hiatus for Easter weekend. We'll see if people show up on our live chat. If not, you can comment as you will once the episode goes along. It's another delightful scholarship episode as we plow our way source by source through the creationist book Titans by Jonathan Sarfati and Joel Tay. And this one, they're talking about one of the awkwardest critters for me to pronounce, Carcharodontosaurus, and large tyrannosaurid carnosaur from the Cretaceous. That is the next listing. And it has to do with the issues about what sources are being used. Remember, I'm keeping track of every single source that Sarfati and Tay use and categorizing them as to whether they're technical papers, whether they're creationist material, whether they're secondary accounts, and in the technical aspects, if they are sources that are being fairly represented or unfairly represented. And by fairly, if they're making a non-controversial point about the item, they're not overtly suppressing or overlooking information in the source. It's fine and dandy. I'm not arguing that their overall position might be accurate or inaccurate, but only that on the point they were dealing with, the source was accurate enough, and they're not bypassing information in it. So 2 sources are on this agenda. One of them falls into the they're not misrepresenting it category because it involves a bite force study on the animal done by Henderson and Company in 2015 as to whether testing out the model of whether a pair of Carcharodontosauruses could bite the neck and tail of a moderately sized sauropod, maybe around a ton, and physically lift it off the ground. This was in relation to a paleontological illustration that showed these animals doing that. And so they were testing out whether this was feasible. And it turns out for an animal of about a ton, yeah, they have the proper bite force and forth you can do, because you can do mechanical analyses of comparable living organisms and work out things. So there's a whole sub-literature on this. Now, of course, none of this work has been done by creationists. So it's a bit of secondary parasitism in their relying on it to begin with, but they're not misrepresenting it. The data point that they bring up about bite force, the technical paper didn't have any discussion of biogeography or systematics or any of the things that they could be accused of misrepresenting or bypassing. So it goes in the okay category. The second paper, however, goes into a different category. And by the way, totally, there's only about 20 some odd % of the work so far has been technical citations. And of those, they're running at close to 60% misrepresentation. So that's a pretty high value, in my opinion, compared to what you got going with even Nathaniel Jensen and Rupin Sanford's level, which is in the about 50% range. So what is this next installment of a paper misrepresented? Well, this one's a delight for me from a scholarly point of view. It's like manna from heaven because it involves the details of how the source is listed. It's a paper from 2006 from Correa and Philip Curry, and it's being cited explicitly for the claim that those Carcharodontosauruses were possibly buried in a catastrophic burial. And what got me off on this cute little trail had to do with the source citation issue, because Sarfati and Tay cited it as Correa R, Curie P, and Correa R.A. and Curry, or rather C. Curry. And so I'm wondering what the hell this additional C. Curry is on their list. Well, when I looked the paper up, it turns out that there's many ways of acquiring a full text paper, and one of which, of course, is ResearchGate. And it happens that once in a while in ResearchGate, you get some really odd sidebar issues as to how a paper's authors are listed, where occasionally they'll list the main authors and then they'll repeat them as if there are more authors on there than there actually are. Because only, in this case, Correa and Curry actually wrote the paper. There's no third author. There is no C. Curry. But there seemed to be this one as Correa, R.A., and Curry at ResearchGate. And so I'm wondering whether Sarfati and Tay might have been relying on a secondary source like that to get the copy of the paper and not looking it down terribly closely, and apparently never looking at the main paper itself to see whether or not it matched up, because the moment you look at the paper, you realize, no, it's just by Correa and Curry. There's no third author involved. That immediately set off my little fun and games. It's entirely a systematic paper. It's going into meticulous detail about every little bone that they've managed to acquire on these things. And the thing that really jumps out for me was in the abstract. It said, based on the metatarsals recovered, a minimum of 7 individuals was buried at the site. It is conceivable that this bone bed represents a coincidental accumulation of carcasses, unquote. No discussion then or anywhere else in the paper about any catastrophic burials. It doesn't actually have a section on the taphonomy of the site and the geology of the site and all the little details that might make some fuss and bother on the point. So where are they getting, Sarfati and Tay, where are they getting this catastrophic burial thing? Well, that turns out to be from a secondary source, which, alas, I will not be able to give you, but I will give you the link that won't get you there either. That turns out to be from a 2006 Owen post from National Geographic, which Sarfati and Tay explicitly admit had a, quote, defunct link, unquote. But they offered one from this particular website, pprune.org, JetBlast, etc., which, as it turns out, wouldn't work either. Although it did lead me to the website, but not to any content that matched up. Now, the website is the Professional Pilots Rumor Network, rumor spelled with an O-U-R, so we're presumably talking British. That's connecting up, I guess, with wherever they're getting their material from. But fortunately, Sarfati and Tay cited a fairly long extract from this Owen piece that gives me what I need to know. The main quote they had referred to the bones having come from, quote, a prehistoric riverbed, unquote. And Owen's piece said, quote, the skeletons showed no sign of disease, Correa says, so the animals were apparently victims of some sudden catastrophic event, unquote. That apparently is the entire justification for the catastrophic burial bit. But catastrophic events, according to whom? At what scale? A tornado can be a catastrophic event. A flash flood can be a catastrophic event. A pyroclastic flow can be a catastrophic event. And none of those are the big slosh. Well, that's where we get back to that number. How big of a catastrophe would be required to bury 7 animals? Remember, that's what the technical paper, which Sarfati and Tay cited as their primary source. Good morning. Good. It's 9 a.m. here. See, the nuts are cracking over the eclipse is the funny part of saying it correlates with the Jewish calendar that is a lunar calendar. Oh, yeah. There's a whole range of the weird nutballs, including apparently Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's been railing on about the earthquake in air quotes, New York. In fact, it was centered in New Jersey. And then now the bit about the eclipse, and there's in the little nooks and crannies of end times crowd, supposedly there's going to be some shit the fan. So some maybe are thinking the rapture is going to take place, well, we'll go bye-bye and you'll go flying up in the sky and we'll never have to worry about you again. We'll find out whether Donald Trump makes the cut. But don't hold your breath on any of that stuff. I got my alarm set here, the nowhere near totality here in Spokane, but I'll be watching it live on television. The various networks are going to be picking it up about 11 o'clock in the morning on Pacific Coast, and it'll look like an eclipse. And there we go. What intrigues me, as just a sidebar that I haven't been able to find out why yet, is why the eclipse lasts so long compared to other eclipses. And, the shadow's moving like 1,500 miles an hour, and it's about a 4-minute long eclipse for any particular area. as opposed to like a couple minutes for the one from 2017. Well, why the difference? And I'm speculating that it would have something to do with the relative positions of the Earth and the Moon in their various orbits, and also the inclination of how the course that the eclipse is taking across the Earth, that all of those things are adding up to the point of where some of them can run longer than others. That's my speculation. But oddly, I can't find any abrupt information on it. And I'm assuming an astronomy person is going, well, we know all about this. But nevertheless, that's kind of outside my little wheelhouse. Anyway, back to our funk and dandy about our cute little paper from Coria and Company. So just how big of a big slosh would be required to bury 7 animals? Now, admittedly, they're big animals, they're Tyrannosaur size, but nonetheless, it's not a gigantic number of animals. And I had not a great deal on the deposit in question. I found a 2004 paper by Lianza on a review of all the whole region and this particular fossil bed among them, relating to their various tetrapod assemblages, which it looks like this is just one slice of a big layer cake of things over time, and in regions where there's localized critters in various spots, entirely consistent with it being a natural environment and not the muck of a catastrophic flood coming in and dropping everything down. Now, what is intriguing is that while the Coria and Curry paper explicitly mentioned the 7 animals in their abstract, no discussion of that is popping up in the creationist version of it in the listing in their encyclopedia. Is that just coincidental omission? You decide. Anyway, there's also additional work on the carcasses as well. 2021 paper by Tanaka on their range and rivalry with tyrannosaurs, and one from 2022 by Canali et al. Trying to suss out how arm reduction is working in big carnosaurs and how much of it is convergent occurring. So there's a huge data set that's going on where the scientists are actually trying to work out the details of things, whereas none of that stuff is showing up. No biogeography, no stratigraphy, none of the other sidebars that would be needed to make any sense out of anything. So we're dealing with just a cartoon over in Sarfati and Taylan. Our second volume for tonight, grab the right mouse here. I've got 2 mice, one for my main PC and the other one for our little show. Yeah, I'll probably have to edit down some of my notes because this may run rather long by the time I try to stick it into the master notes. But anyway, in part 2, Jeffrey Dykes, who is another new name on the Creation Ministry international landscape, he's just starting to do some stuff, offers a gee-whiz piece on the Roadrunner. This was the little item in question. We'll be able to put the link up for that. Not a hell of a lot of technical material on it. That's why I refer to it as gee-whiz. On some Roadrunner-like trackway because the Roadrunners are in the cuckoo family and hence cuckoo kind, the running adaptation has to be after creation in the creation model. No details on whether that's possible, what would be entailed for development. It's just skipping that detail. But Dykes trots out a 2007 popular post from the science blogs on a Roadrunner-like trackway that dates back into the early Cretaceous, rather than a link to the paper itself, which is available, Lockley 2007. But anyway, the creationists do mention that, quote, Roadrunner fossils have been found in layers supposedly just tens of thousands of years old, unquote. What they were supposed to make out of that, our little fellow is not exactly clear about. But it turns out there are only 2 species of Roadrunners, one of which has a fossil record, such as one Howard 1962, which I'll be putting the link to that paper up, from the Rancho La Brea tar pits, probably. So the dynamics of that bird are such, and the arid environment that it's living in and all the rest is a really terrible opportunity for it to get fossilized, unless it drops into the La Brea tar pits, in which case, bingo, you got a little bit of a fossil record. Now, Dykes then leaps on to some very dated tropes about bird feather evolution. And what does he wave but the obligatory Alan Brush 1996, which I'll be putting the link up to that one, on feather origins. It's been habitually quote mined on this matter by creationists, intelligent designers, and young earth creationists. Problem is that Alan Brush didn't stop writing in 1996. And he teamed up with Richard Prum in particular in 2002. So I'll be putting a link up to their paper, which is expanding on the whole notion of working out the developmental biology and genetics of feather evolution. So the very fact that Dykes is relying on this older material is just recycling the same old shtick on creationist apologetics. I yawn at this point. Now, the then question becomes, either Dykes is unaware of the newer work, which is entirely probable, or he decides not to mention it, even though it's like 20 years after the fact. You decide. That's why it is really helpful to look at the bigger context of where sources are and how often they're used and how often they've materialized to see what's getting mentioned and what isn't. It's almost ubiquitous that if somebody is waving feather evolution, you're going to get Alan Fiducia and Alan Brush 1996. It's extremely common material for the old quote mining. Enough to give me conniption fits. So let me stop here and put our thank you note for our patrons for the project. And let me see where we are. Open up, share screen. Blah, blah, blah. I could not do this without you guys, our colleagues, our researchers, our assistant researcher levels, our friends, and the legacy patrons over the years. Every week, every month, it makes a difference to squeak by to continue up the project. I would love to have many more patrons. I would love to have many more things, but we make do with what we can. And I'm very, very grateful of everybody that continues to help the project. Ian Chen and Paulogia and Slava, Speed of Sound, Benjamin Simplin, Eric Rowley, Cyrus Hendrell, who've stuck with it all this time, and all the other Command Cyborg and Scott Duke and the Lavender Lady and Studio Dean Wang and Dana, Morton Nielsen, Bo Hobo Rasmussen, Alex Stone, Paul Williams, all of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I am very, very mindful of how that field details. One advantage of working as it is today, at least, is that so much of the material is available, just as I've been showing week after week, that never be intimidated by somebody's footnote referencing, and don't overlook footnote referencing in matters. That sometimes you won't be able to acquire the original work if it's a very obscure, or particularly if it's a book. The worst case scenarios for scholarship relate to finding books, some of which might be available in your local library, or if you're in a town that has college libraries, you may be able to find stuff there. Occasionally you can find, particularly with very old works though, if we're talking about 19th century or early 20th century works, do a Google search on the title, and they can pop up not infrequently at archive.org, either in ones that you can borrow electronically or ones you can download full PDF. So there's a lot of stuff in there, but the technical articles, boy, they're becoming increasingly available. And if they aren't available to you, but you really want to see a source to find out whether or not somebody is misrepresenting the content of it, and a lot of science articles and nature articles may be in that category, and particularly things in geology and some of the paleontology journals might not be excessively open access. Write to the author and explain what you're up to, and they'll more than often just send you the material either as a physical hard copy or as an attached PDF. So they love sharing information that way. And the more information you got, the better. So never be intimidated by somebody simply lobbing footnotes. The faux erudition of people who are trying to bury you in technical references, the proof is in the pudding, it's in the reading. And so that's why I make it a standard procedure on this show that although I may be alluding to a variety of things and there may be even more information, there is in fact on this Roadrunner example a lot more technical material that I uncovered, but they're not available open access. And so I'm only putting links up each week to stuff that you can get full copy of. And so you don't have to take my word for it. Bingo. You can look and compare the two and run off in whatever direction you want. So I want to have that as an ongoing resource that anybody who plops into the thing can use that as a springboard. I routinely go through, in fact, Jackson Wheat, my co-author on Rocks Were There, sends me, as well as other people, Nestling and others all get these scripts for his various videos so that we can go through them and check through them. And he's a really sharp analyst. And most of the time I'm only making little minor tweaks and a little comment here and there. But what's intriguing about it is that I'm checking to make sure that all the source material that Jackson is drawing on is in my reference field so we can make use of it if needed. And in fact, quite a few segments of some of the material relating to tetrapods and lanceolets and a few others immediately are going into the new book because it's directly touching on subjects that are relating to what we're dealing with in the new work. We're going into tetrapod origins and how David Menton mangled that. And it's a fun and game operation. What we want for the 2 volumes on Rocks Were There is that you'll have a really comprehensive resource that will tell you what the creations literature has been currently plus historically going back into the print era, as well as material relating to the technical literature that they're discussing and all the relevant technical literature that they're not discussing so that you can have the big picture to have a sense where you can see how they are representing or not representing material fairly. And if we can be setting a benchmark for procedures in that area, we'll be happy as clams. There's nothing preventing people to do that other than the admittedly laborious process of checking footnotes and source referencing and the like to see that particularly anybody that goes into any particular area should be homing in right off the bat on any controversial point. And the more somebody makes a claim that's bucking the thing, saying, oh, the evolutionist admits this is so, blah, blah, footnote, that's where you kind of want to home in because this theoretically would be a smoking gun. So did not the original author of the paper know they were writing this extremely incendiary claim that the creationist is waving in front of us? Or is it that the paper is not in fact supporting their position and you need to find out about it? Along the way, then you may be taking a note about the weird footnoting. Several times Sarfati has misblipped the source material. Sometimes people will get the wrong names in there. I mean, everybody makes mistakes. It's easily done. But if it is occurring on a more than just casual basis, this can be an indication that the person is actually a pretty sloppy researcher, that they're too quick on the draw, they're cut and pasting. Another point that I mentioned before, and it's relevant to bring up, is inconsistent footnoting. If the same journal is listed more than once, but it's listed in a way that's different in each version. So sometimes it's just a volume number and page number or issue number, as many footnotes can be on, say, Science and Nature. But others are listing the title of the thing and the date of the work and may not be giving you page numbers, or inconsistent use of et als, where somebody they're listing every single one of the names, like 5 or 6 of them in some footnotes. And in other cases, it's Smith et al. And there's only like the same number of names in that work as well. Why the inconsistency on it? That may be a clue that they're getting the source secondarily from somebody else and they're copying it slavishly. This is something that's if you have somebody that's a pseudo scholar, they will, and especially to the extent that they don't really know the material, they're really anal retentive to print it exactly as it was in the source they're pirating. So they won't standardize things. And if they've never looked up the original material, then they won't know if something has been misspelled, or they've gotten the name indication wrong, or got a third name stuck in there for no apparent reason. All of those are telltale clues that you've got somebody that's not as close to the data field as they should be. That's the source methods thing at the grounding footnote level. So as I'm reminding of everybody that listens to this at any stage, it wants to get into the criticizing woo, pick an area that you know, rather than an area that's outside of your expertise, although you can broaden your expertise and dive into it and learn more by that process. Try not to, of course, to have to reinvent the wheel and do everything from scratch, because that can be repetitive. So I don't see a need to, although I want to be aware of the material on human evolution at great depth, nonetheless, I am also paying attention to somebody like Erica Gutsick-Gibbon, who is a paleoanthropologist, and therefore that's her field. And so she is noticing details about a paper that might escape the secondary view that I would have because they're aware of the material. So when you get to a level of expertise, I have some things that I'm more aware of than others. It gives you a leg up on that. And the more that you can draw on other people, but not slavishly. So when I'm looking at a piece by Dan Stern-Cognelli or Erica or Zach Hancock or Dapper Dino or anybody, I'm delighted in their analysis, and I'm also cross-checking their source material to obtain that material myself, to look at it directly. And that can often lead to new material that I wasn't anticipating that's outside of their area as well. The one area where maybe as an old fart, I have a little more convenience and insight is the fact that I'm old enough to have drawn a lot of material off of older print works that the younger internet-based people wouldn't necessarily have access to. So I bet unless you're really into this sort of thing, how likely are you to have Duane Gish's Evolution of the Fossils Still Say No? Or say Philip Johnson's Darwin on Trial. They're not available online, or you can get versions of them for ebooks on a lot of cases. But nonetheless, and they are probably, Johnson stuff more likely to be available at the library than, say, Gish. But that means that all of the apologetics that were being done by Philip Johnson in the 1990s and Duane Gish back in the 1980s, back to the 1970s, because he was writing books for an awful long time, retreading material and expanding. The Evolution of the Fossils Still Say No was based on Evolution of the Fossils Say No from the 1970s. And the content of that, a lot of it will be familiar material to anybody that's familiar with creationist literature, but there will be other details that will be benchmarking how the lore has evolved over time. And so one of the ones that we're making a big deal out of in the new book is the issue about when did carnivory appear in the animal kingdom? And was that after the flood or just after Adam sinned? And there's been a considerable amount of evolution going on that if you have somebody that's relying on an old Duane Gish piece from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, or Ken Ham for that matter, from that same period, they're going to take carnivory as post-flood. Whereas the current group, including Sarfati and Tay's book, have evolved to the point where they pretty much had to give up all of that argument. They've had to accept that there were red and tooth and claw carnivory taking place in animals that are preserved in the flood times and therefore were existing that way pre-flood. And they don't think a hell of a lot farther on that, but at some vague point in that, like 1,000 years or so, separating Adam and Eve sinning and the big slosh, all of that had to arise. And they're not getting a great deal as to the plausibility of how much of any of that could be structured. by looking into that older material, you can get a better perspective on stuff. Plate tectonics is another one that's changed dramatically. The Duane Gish era creationism did not allow plate tectonics or continental drift at all. And now it's part and parcel. They've glommed on to Pangea and Rodinia even, and supercontinents. If you give them long enough, they're going to be scarfing around in Colombia, which is one previous to Rodinia. Looks like supercontinent cycles run like about every 600 million years. But how all that fits into the pre-flood environment, where there has to be the created basement rocks, and 1,000 years later, you got the flood. How much room do you have for continent shuffling? Creation Ministries International seems to be running in a different mode than Answers in Genesis as to whether or not the pre-flood world was Pangea versus Rodinia. The Creation Museum goes with the Rodinia supercontinent as the pre-flood world, kind of, sort of. It's hard to kind of mesh that in with what Todd Wood kind of writes about and Andrew Snelling, because they don't get past the cartoon for any kind of detail, which the moment you jump over into paleo reconstructions of ancient climate systems and continental distributions and tectonic fronts and all the kinds of stuff, the level of detail between that and what you get in an Andrew Snelling piece is just night and day. And the stuff, other than this kind of micromanaging thing that he does, like when he went to the Grand Canyon, he picked up his little rocks and he's written just scads of papers for the creationism conferences where he's going through the little crystals and he's got his little photo micrographs, and it's just impenetrably irrelevant because there's no indication of what the hell any of this is supposed to be meaning. But he should be, theoretically, having been at this for decades. Why haven't they been able to clarify what the hell was going on in the pre-flood world? What did it look like? What animals were existing where? How did they get there? What was going on with things on a level of detail that's anywhere close? They don't even get to the level of detail that paleontology work was being done when I was a kid. If you read old 1950s and 60s papers, in many cases, there's more detail in 19th century monographs than what you're getting in the creationist literature. And the only way that you would notice that is to be comparing the two. So that's why I like putting in the linkages to these geology papers and the paleontology stuff. So not only are you getting the firsthand reports of things that you can check up on yourself, but you can also see the level of detail and the level of documentation that is the norm for serious scientific literature. You can then compare to the little cartoon fluff that you're getting in the creationism side or in intelligent design. Part of the stuff that I'm working on right now relates to Gunter Beckley and his discussion of Precambrian organisms that's going to be in Chapter 5. And then there's going to be issues about human evolution, which is Beckley just lit into Jackson and Erica and Dapper Dino and Dan Stern Cardinale and all that for the issue of Homo habilis and the paleoanthropological material. And we're also talking about some just amazingly obtuse avoidance of the technical material. And it looks like an awful lot of Beckley just channeling Casey Luskin stuff and recycling it. Beckley kind of gets into a defensive mode of where he's got the lines in the sand and he's been defending Steve Meyer and he's going to stick with that no matter what. And some of the examples that we're documenting in the new book are Andrew Snelling level of what? Where claims are being made about technical papers that are just flat out wrong. And you wonder, did Beckley read the bloody paper? Because it discusses the very thing that he accuses them of not discussing. Didn't he read it closely? And some of this stuff looks a lot like he's just scavenging around some of the apologetics that were in Stephen Meyer's books, particularly Darwin's Doubt, and just kind of plugging in some additional apologetics. Sometimes he can be very verbose about it. My God, he's got 7 or 8 posts just on Kimberella that are not that detailed in terms of content. And again, we have no idea what the hell he thinks happened with any of these things. Is anything related to anything? Meanwhile, this is all material that we're going to be putting into the new book. Boy, have the paleontologists been advancing in this area. Admittedly, it's tricky to try to figure out what's going on with organisms that are extinct. And a big chunk of the Cambrian critters are extinct. And all of the Ediacara notable biota, you don't have a living Dickinsonia or a Kimberella to look at. But that doesn't mean you can't draw inferences of things. And under the evolutionary model, where genetic systems are doing stuff, they're laying out the benchmarks of the kinds of things that needed to be involved and change over time in order to generate these things. And so it's only a matter of time before the paleogenomics advances to the stage where they're starting to look at genetic systems in basal organisms, everything from choanoflagellates to lanceolates and others and annelids, that they'll be tweaking and doing experiments to see if they can generate the kind of developmental cascades that are producing these eccentric organisms that we're seeing, trilobe things and the little frond creatures and all the rest. How much of it is involving homeobox genes, how many is using in WNT and some of these other genetic systems that are being inferred by the nature of how the evolutionary process works. And that is just light years ahead of what's going on in the intelligent design movement or over in creationism land. In fact, it's interesting that I'll give Beckley and company props for bringing up a lot of these taxa. Young Earth creationists tend to avoid most of this stuff. The Ediacara biota tend to get bypassed, just little occasional blips, and that's about as far as it goes on there. So we'll be going into an awful lot of this stuff and put everything into a delightful perspective on that, and to show how similar so much of the intelligent design apologetics is to the young Earth creationist apologetics. Shaken up in a bag and they come out the same bad methodological level. Well, anyway, let me put up our little advert to our Rocks for Their book. And that's our shameless plug moment. Come on, Pate. It's admittedly quite loud. We fully admit to that. At any rate, it is available. We always put the links to all to this and Evolution Slam Dunk, as well as my novels, are always in as well as the Patreon link in every single video. So if you want to deal with it, proceed accordingly. We're very, very proud of Evolution Slam Dunk. The new book will have material, as we did in the previous volume, right up to the last minute. In fact, a brand new paper is coming out that Neil Shubin has co-authored in PNAS that actually has just hit in advance. It'll actually get published this next Tuesday at PNAS on the latest high-resolution tomography analysis of Tiktaalik, which is suggesting that its pelvic region and rib cage are in fact linked in ways that they hadn't anticipated. And so all of that gets plugged into the new material so that it can be as accurate as possible. And that way it's got a good sweep of material I think also it will be, for those who found volume 1 full of hilarious wackaloonery, volume 2 is where things go off the rails for wackaloonery, because that's where we have the big section on the Noah's Ark, and the hunt for Noah's Ark, and the hunt for living dinosaurs, and the hunt through legends to find out how many people had flood tales, and all of this kind of stuff. All of that's put in volume 2, as well as more on the paleontology and the genetics and the biology. We're going to have a ton of material on whale evolution. Gunter Beckley has put up a post, fairly glib, on whales, but where the hell is that paper that he and Hostler and that were supposed to be coming up with? It's been like 7 years now. I mean, it's been a long time. That when Erica had a chat with him on it, it sounded like it was about ready to appear. I haven't seen anything like that materializing at Biocomplexity, or in any other little niche thing. And if it had been out, I would have assumed that Beckley would have linked to it in this newer post that he just did this year on grumping about whale evolution. So that suggests that one is a coming attraction that may be in the same level as the second coming of Christ. Not at all as predictable as the eclipse on Monday. So anyway, we are past 40 minutes. Gregory, have fun there in the show. We put up our adverts and all the rest and thanked everybody. Next week, we will have another show, and we will be proceeding accordingly through there. I'm very intrigued to see just how much their technical literature balance changes, because we are looking that, boy, they're not citing a lot of technical literature off of this. And for every technical paper they're popping up, there's an awful lot of stuff. They're just recycling previous sources. Paul's Dinosaur Encyclopedia gets referenced an awful lot, stuff like that. And then, of course, there are references to the creationist material that they're recycling. So I wouldn't be at all surprised that that balance of about half of the material is young Earth creationist apologetics, in-house CMI stuff, by the way. Virtually none of it's from AIG or ICR, so they're very tunnel vision on that. And then only about a quarter technical literature, and misrepresenting over half of that. We'll find out whether or not that percentage holds. Totally, they've only got like 143 sources in the book so far, which is pretty wimpy, very, very minor. And as we've already seen, is relatively older material. Most of their more recent material is just their creationist apologetics. So it's not, I can't say surprisingly disappointing, but given how lavish the illustrations are on that, if they had had more of an underpinning in their own side to offer, why wouldn't they offer it? Well, the simple answer is they don't have it to offer. So they can't really deal with that. So anyway, we're at 45 minutes coming up on, and I think that will do. I don't need to go blathering on indefinitely. We will all see you all next week. Stay safe if you're in any areas, if you're in the crowd mobs to see the eclipse Monday. Hope you get good weather. If not, have fun and stay safe. And if you're in places where bombs are dropping, steer clear of all that stuff. And keep on guard for wooden penguins, because we know they're always waiting to make their move. And we will all see you all next week. Au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, aloha.